Nobody attacks the man who responds like this. They tried to break him in public. A Roman senator stood up in front of the crowd and pointed his finger at Marcus Aurelius, mocking his philosophy, questioning his fitness to lead. The whole room waited. Everyone expected the emperor to retaliate, to destroy the man with power, to remind him who held the sword. Marcus Aurelius looked at him quietly. Then he turned to his advisors, nodded, and moved on to the next matter of business. The senator was confused. The crowd was stunned. And within weeks, every man in Rome was talking about what had happened, not about the senator's insult, but about the emperor's silence. Because a man who cannot be rattled cannot be ruled. That is what this is about. Not aggression. Not passivity. But the kind of inner architecture that makes you genuinely untouchable, where attacks slide off you not because you don't feel them, but because you've trained yourself to respond from a place so deep that no one can reach it. Most men today live on the surface. Their mood lives in their phone screen. Their confidence lives in someone else's opinion. Their peace lives in the absence of problems. And the moment someone pokes that surface, with a comment, a challenge, a disrespect, they collapse inward or explode outward. Both reactions hand over power. Both reactions confirm to the attacker that they found the nerve. The man who responds differently? He becomes something else entirely. A force that people instinctively know not to test twice. Subscribe to Inner Steel. Every week, we go deep on what it actually takes to build a mind no one can break. Here is what separates those men from everyone else. Learn to sit with discomfort. Learn to let an attack land without immediately reaching for a counter. Let it pass through you. Then, from a calm center, decide if a response is even worth your energy. And if it is, respond with something so precise and so composed that the room feels the weight of it. That is the silence that speaks louder than any defense. The body that doesn't flinch. Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, was crushed by Antarctic ice in 1915. 27 men were stranded on a frozen continent with no communication, no rescue, and no certainty that they would survive. Shackleton could have fallen apart. By every logical measure, the situation was hopeless. Instead, every morning, he was the first one up. He maintained his composure so completely that his men drew courage from just being near him. Not because he pretended everything was fine, but because his body, his manner, the steadiness in his eyes told them without words, "We will get through this." He understood that his nervous system was the team's anchor. If it broke, everything broke. All 27 men survived. Not by luck. By leadership. And leadership began in Shackleton's body before it ever became a plan. Your body is not separate from your mind. It is your mind's first language. When someone challenges you and your shoulders rise, your voice tightens, your jaw clenches, you've already telegraphed the message. You've told them where the wound is. You've communicated at a frequency deeper than words that this person got under your skin. The body that doesn't flinch says something completely different. It says, "I've seen worse than you. I've been through more than this moment. You are not a threat to what I'm building." This takes training. Literal, physical training. Cold showers that teach your nervous system to stop treating discomfort as an emergency. Physical training that shows your body what it actually can handle. Breathing practices that build the pause between stimulus and response into something habitable. Time spent sitting still when everything in you wants to move, teaching the nervous system that stillness is not the same as danger. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in the Meditations, returning again and again to the importance of not being carried away by impressions. The impression that something is terrible. The impression that you've been wronged. The impression that you must react right now. He trained himself to let the first wave of emotion pass before he acted from it. You can train this. The man who controls his body controls the room. The man who lets his body react without direction becomes predictable, and predictable men get played. The record that stands for itself. In 1956, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery, Alabama bus. What many people don't know is that she wasn't acting on impulse. She was a trained activist, deeply aware of what she was doing and why. She was quiet, composed, and certain. When the police arrived, she didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't argue. She asked one question. "Why do you push us around?" The officer reportedly said he didn't know, but the law was the law. She let her actions speak. She let the arrest speak. She let the record of that moment speak, and it echoed for decades. People tried to minimize her, dismiss her, character assassinate her. It didn't stick. Because her record was real. Her work was documented. Her character had been built over years of deliberate action before anyone was watching. That is what a man with a record never has to fight with words. Most men feel they need to verbally defend their reputation constantly. To correct every mischaracterization. To win every room. They don't understand that a real record does that work automatically. When your actions over time are consistent, when you show up, deliver, build real things, keep your word, do the difficult things no one saw, a single attack against your character slides off you. Not because you dodged it, but because anyone who actually knows you knows better. You don't build a reputation by talking about who you are. You build it by making decisions no one will ever see, and letting them accumulate. The man who keeps private score, who tracks only his own growth, who doesn't need external validation to know where he stands, that man develops a gravity that reputation seekers spend their whole lives trying to buy. Your record is your defense. Build it silently. Then let it stand for itself. The question that dismantles everything. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz. He survived the death of nearly everyone he loved. He survived conditions that destroyed stronger men around him every day. He wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your freedom. Your power. The last thing that cannot be taken from you. He found that even in a concentration camp, he could choose how to interpret what was happening to him. Not whether it was happening. Not whether it was terrible. But what meaning he would assign to it. That single freedom, tiny, internal, invisible to his captors, was the thing that kept him psychologically alive. He asked himself a question every time the weight became unbearable. Why am I still here? That question reframed everything. Not, why is this happening to me? Which is the question of a victim, but, what is my purpose in surviving this? Which is the question of a man who has not surrendered. One question changes everything. Most men, when attacked, ask, what did I do wrong? Or, why are they doing this to me? Both questions place you in a passive position. Both questions make the other person the center of the story. The man who responds differently asks, what does this reveal about them? What does this reveal about me? How does my handling of this moment define what I'm becoming? These questions are not deflection. They are redirection. They pull the camera from the attack and point it at the man receiving it. And when you're focused on who you're becoming instead of what's being thrown at you, you become genuinely dangerous to anyone trying to diminish you. You can't break a man who is asking the right questions. Because those questions keep reconstructing him from the inside, turning every attack into raw material for growth. Ask better questions. The attack becomes information. The critic becomes a mirror. The hard moment becomes the point in the story where everything changed. The standard no one can argue with. Epictetus was born a slave. Not metaphorically, literally. He was owned. He had no legal rights. His master once tortured him by twisting his leg, supposedly to test Epictetus' claim that pain could not touch the inner self. Epictetus said calmly, "You will break it." The master kept twisting. Epictetus didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't recant. "There," he finally said. "I told you so." His leg was broken. His composure never was. He was eventually freed. He went on to become one of the most respected philosophers in the Roman world, teaching emperors and generals how to live. Not because he had power, not because he had rank, but because he had a standard that nothing external could move. No one could argue with who he was because who he was existed beyond the reach of circumstance. That is the standard we're talking about. Not a standard you announce. Not a standard you post about. A standard you hold when no one is watching, and especially when someone is testing it. What does that standard look like in practice? It means you don't participate in certain conversations, not because you're afraid of them, but because they're beneath what you're building. It means you don't engage with certain provocations, not because you don't have the words, but because spending words there is a waste of what you've developed. It means when someone disrespects you, there is a clear answer inside you that doesn't require their approval to be true. You know who you are. You know what you've done. You know what you're doing right now, today, in private, when no one is watching. And that knowledge makes outside attacks feel genuinely small. A man with a real internal standard cannot be destabilized by someone trying to define him from the outside. Because his definition of himself was built in the dark, in the silence, in the work, not in the applause and not in the criticism. When your standard is that clean, your response to attacks becomes almost automatic. You hold the standard. Everything else adjusts around it. The refusal to play the game. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine commander named Vasily Arkhipov made a decision that saved the world. The submarine had been under depth charge attack by American forces. The crew had lost communications. The captain, believing war had already started, wanted to launch the nuclear torpedo on board. 2 of the 3 officers required for authorization agreed. Arkhipov said no. Not because he was certain the captain was wrong. Not because he had better information. But because the stakes were too high to act on incomplete information, and the game being played around him, the escalation, the provocation, the pressure, was not a game he was willing to participate in without certainty. He refused to pull the trigger. The torpedo was never launched. The war never happened. Historians believe Arkhipov literally saved the world from nuclear war. He refused to play the game. This is one of the most underestimated forms of power, recognizing that you are being drawn into someone else's game and choosing not to pick up the controller. When someone baits you into an argument, they have already set the terms. The rules of their game favor them, because they made the rules. The moment you accept the invitation to argue on their terms, in their arena, about the thing they chose to make the issue, you've already ceded ground. The strongest move is often to not play. This is not avoidance. Avoidance comes from fear. This is a strategic withdrawal from a game you didn't design and didn't agree to, because your time and energy belong to something else. The man who learns to say, with his body and his presence, "This isn't a game I'm in," that man baffles attackers. Because he takes away their weapon. The weapon was your reaction. When the reaction doesn't come, the weapon doesn't exist. Choose your battles with surgical precision. Not every challenge deserves a response. Not every critic deserves access to your thought process. Some things are answered better by your continued presence, your continued work, your continued indifference to the invitation to be derailed. The memory that holds. Seneca wrote from prison. He wrote letters to his friend Lucilius, letters that became some of the most read philosophy in history, while facing the very real possibility of execution under Nero. He was not writing from safety. He was not writing from comfort. He was writing from inside the thing itself, and he kept returning to one idea. The only thing that actually belongs to you is how you use the time in front of you. Not yesterday. Not tomorrow. Not the reputation you've built. Not the relationships you hope will last. This moment, this choice, this quality of attention you bring to the next thing in front of you. He wrote, "Omit all of your past from consideration. Not to ignore what you've been through, but because the past, re-experienced as grievance, becomes a prison." And he was already in enough prisons. The man who carries his wounds into every room weaponizes himself against himself. We all have been attacked, betrayed, dismissed, mocked. There is not a man reading this who hasn't had someone try to make him feel small. And some of those people were important to us. Some of them were supposed to be safe. Some of those wounds went deep. But here is what Seneca understood that most men never do. The man who can't let go of an old wound keeps fighting a war that already ended. He keeps spending his present moment on a past moment. He keeps paying rent on pain he no longer has to live in. Letting go is not forgiveness as mercy. It is forgiveness as strategy. You release the grievance because carrying it is costing you energy that belongs to your future. The man who responds with calm power today has usually done significant work releasing what was done to him yesterday. He's not calm because nothing happened to him. He's calm because he has processed it, drawn the lesson from it, and refused to let it become the lens through which he sees every new situation. That kind of memory, selective, purposeful, building rather than burning, is what makes a man durable across decades, not just impressive for a moment. The future they can't touch. There is a story told about a young general who was brought before Alexander the Great as a prisoner. The general had fought bravely. His city had been defeated. By all logic, he should have been terrified. He was looking at the most powerful conqueror in the known world, and his life was at Alexander's mercy. But the general stood straight. He met Alexander's gaze. He did not grovel. Alexander, intrigued, asked him, "Are you afraid?" The general said, "I have already decided what kind of man I am going to be from this moment forward. You can take my present and my past. But you cannot take that decision." Alexander freed him. And then made him a general in his own army. Because Alexander recognized what very few people do, that a man who has already committed to his future cannot be truly threatened by his present circumstances. He's already somewhere else. He's already building something that doesn't require this moment to go well. Most men live as if the present moment is all they have, and so every attack in the present moment feels like a total threat. Their identity, their future, their worth, all of it feels on the line in this single conversation, this single confrontation, this single opinion of a single person. The man who has committed to a vision, who knows where he's going and what he's becoming, experiences the same moment completely differently. The attack is just weather. It doesn't change the direction. It's not even that interesting compared to where he's headed. This is why having a real purpose is not spiritual decoration. It is armor. A man who knows why he gets up changes the entire calculus of what can and cannot break him. The attack has to compete with the vision. And most attacks, held up against a real vision, are simply not that significant. Decide who you are going to be. Not someday. Decide now. And then let every present moment challenge be evaluated against that decision. Most of them won't survive the comparison. The last thing they expect. There is one final thing that separates the man no one can break from all the others. It is not toughness, exactly. It is not even composure. It is compassion. Not soft compassion. Not the kind that makes excuses for people or pretends attacks don't sting. But the deep compassion that comes from understanding why people attack in the first place. People attack because they are afraid. They diminish because they feel small. They mock because they want to feel elevated. They betray because they are trying to secure something they don't believe they deserve. None of that justifies the behavior. But understanding it removes its power. When Marcus Aurelius was mocked by that senator, he may well have thought, "This man is frightened. He's performing for the crowd because he needs the crowd. He doesn't have what I have, the interior life, the philosophy, the practice of sitting quietly with himself. His noise is actually a form of poverty." You can feel compassion for someone and still choose not to engage with their behavior. You can understand why someone does what they do and still hold the line. You can see the wound inside the person attacking you and still refuse to be wounded by them. In fact, this is one of the most disorienting responses available to you, because the person who attacks you expects one of two things: submission or retaliation. Those are the two known moves. When you respond with quiet understanding, when you offer something unexpected and generous from a place of complete stability, it breaks the script entirely. They came with a weapon. You handed them something they didn't know what to do with. That is the final layer of the man no one attacks twice. He's not a harder target. He's a different kind of target altogether. One that attack cannot improve. One whose foundation was built for decades before today's challenge arrived. One who has already decided who he is, what he stands for, and how he will respond, and that decision was made long before anyone showed up to test it. This is what inner steel is about. Not the performance of strength. The actual construction of it, point by point, day by day, in the silence of your private hours when nobody is watching and everything is still being decided. If this spoke to something in you, subscribe to Inner Steel. Every week, we go into the philosophy, the history, the real-world practice of becoming the kind of man who stands unmoved when the world comes at him. Not because nothing moves you, but because you decided, long ago, what you stand on.